Hey friends, welcome to the Raising Boys and Girls podcast. I'm Sissy Goff.
And I'm David Thomas.
And I'm Melissa Trevathan.
And we're so glad you joined us for this conversation. Let's dive in.
Tori Hope Petersen is an author, speaker, Bible teacher, and lover of people. Since coming to faith, she has shared her testimony in life as authentically as she can to help and offer hope to others. Tori is known for her fierce advocacy work for foster care, adoption, and vulnerable children. At home, she is a wife and mama who enjoys cooking with her children. With a deep value for family, community, and hospitality, Tori and her family love to make extra food for whoever might stop by. Her new book, Breaking the Patterns That Break You, is available nationwide. You will love this conversation with our new friend, Tori Hope Petersen. Tori, we are so excited to have time with you. And I got the pleasure of meeting you. I was standing in line behind you at a movie premiere, and we got to talking. And it's so fun that we're getting to intersect again here and to talk about your new book, which we are so excited about.
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've actually been pretty sad that we have not crossed paths since that movie premiere. So this is great.
Yes, you need to come back to Nashville.
I know. I'm coming to Nashville next week for more podcast interviews.
Oh, good.
I love Nashville. It's only like a 7 hour. I actually drive when I go because the airport is like 2 hours away. I live in a very rural community. And so I actually just drive, and it's not even a bad drive. I just love Nashville. I love it.
It's a great city.
It is.
Yes. Well, we are so grateful for you being willing to share your story with us. And we would love for you to talk more about that. I know you moved from more than 12 homes before your 18th birthday, which is just unbelievable. I cannot imagine what that experience is like. Will you talk about how your story informs the work you're doing now?
Yeah. So I went into foster care for the first time when I was 4 years old, was reunited with my family of origin, and then went back into the system at 12. And throughout my life, moved throughout 12 foster homes, and just felt very unwanted and very unloved. So very aware that that is a feeling that other people have. And I aged out the day I turned 18 without a forever family, without a forever home. I was instantly homeless, kind of bouncing around from people's houses within my church. And then my track coach actually took me in, and his daughters went to him and said, he was my track coach for about 3 years. So his daughters knew me, and they said, why is Tori not living with us? She needs a home. She needs a family. Let's be her home and family. And so he is now who my kids call grandpa, and he is my dad, and his daughters are my sisters, and they are now my forever family. And since then, I have had the great privilege of being able to advocate for kids in foster care in a lot of different ways, whether that's partnering with organizations and helping them raise funds so that they can serve kids in foster care and serve vulnerable children, or I've advocated on Capitol Hill to change policy so that we have better outcomes for youth in foster care, because the statistics are very, very saddening. And my husband and I have the great privilege of being foster parents and opening our home to kids who need that home in a family, whether that's for a short time or a long time.
We are so grateful for the difference you're making in all of those places, Tori.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Tori, we'd love to ask you too, just in your experience, when did you begin to recognize the negative patterns from your past were holding you back? And what was the turning point, would you say, in beginning to heal?
Okay, it actually started really early. And it's when I think about it, I wouldn't necessarily have identified it as a pattern at this time, but I had a teacher in junior high who had us read the book 7 Habits of a Highly Effective Teenager, spinoff of the book 7 Habits of a Highly Effective Person. And the first rule was begin with the end in mind. And when you're like in junior high, I had no idea what that meant. So I was like, okay, what does this mean? And he just said, he was talking to the whole class, and he basically said, you guys are going to need to start taking life seriously, and you guys are going to need to really start applying yourself, or some of you are going to end up like your parents. And that just really struck me, because in that moment, and I will say till the day that I die, that my biological mom did the absolute best with what she had. My mom is a survivor of child abuse and trauma. And, she didn't have as many resources as we have today on trauma. And she also didn't have a church community in the way that I had a church community to help me and serve me. No one presented who Jesus was to her. And so she didn't have all the opportunities that I have had, but I think she did break a lot of generational curses. She just didn't break all of them. And so, with that being said, with going into the foster care system, and I had this teacher who said, some of you guys are going to end up like your parents. And I just imagined me as a mom, and I knew I wanted to be a mom someday. And I imagined me as a mom, and, there were drugs on the table, and there, just unsafe people coming in and out of our home. It was like the home that I lived in. And then I had it was almost like two TikToks playing side by side on each other. And, the other image that I had was me being a mom and me being able to nurture my children and them have people in their life who were stable and who love them and who were safe. And I was like, okay, I think I'm going to try and make some changes. I was like a CD student. And I was like, okay, I think I'm going to try and get good grades. And even though, we know now as adults that grades are not the end all be all, that they're not like a huge part of our lives now. But I think that was kind of the beginning of recognizing that I wanted something different for my own family and for my own children. But I wouldn't say that, I was very fortunate. I had a judge that there was a lot of people who had control of my life that were very wise. And so I had a judge who mandated that I start going to therapy when I was like 12 years old because of the abuse and the trauma that I had endured from my family of origin. And looking back, I was like, I don't need therapy. I don't want to go to therapy. That's ridiculous. But now looking back as an adult and understanding trauma and experiencing all that I did at such a young age, that was probably one of the best decisions that he could have made for me. Now I have to communicate, and I communicate very hard things. And that started probably there, where I had to communicate very hard things that happened to me, and I had to process through them. And now processing through things and talking through things is a large part of my everyday life, helping other kids do that, helping other youth do that. And so, it really started with just some really wise people, wise counsel in my life, making the right decisions for me and saying things like my teacher that were maybe kind of scary to say, but needed to be said.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, there's so many things we love that you talk about. You write about the importance of rebuilding ourselves and finding a home within, which I love. Will you talk about what it means to create a safe place inside of ourselves and how someone who maybe doesn't feel safe in their emotional world can start?
Yeah. Ephesians 2:22 says, in him, you also are being built together in a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. And so it's God, right, who dwells within us, that he is our ultimate safe place. He's identified in the Psalms many times as our safe house or safe place, as a safe dwelling place. And then he dwells within us. And so I think, when I was 17, I came to Christ through a very, it was a very safe church that I was attending. They were very trauma informed. They served foster and adopted parents and foster and adopted families. And I looked at them and I thought, maybe if they care about kids like me, then maybe God cares about me. And came to the Lord through really just seeing their love, watching them walk with integrity and being very compelled. And by that love, I was very angry when I was young. I think obviously because of the trauma and because of all the pain. And I didn't want that anger in me. And then so when I saw their love, it was like their love cast out their anger, cast out their bitterness, right? And so I was like, okay, I want that love. I want that love for myself, and I want to be able to just express that to other people. And so I accepted Christ into my life, but it was really, even though I had heard, God loves me, and I'd heard the truth of what God said about me, I didn't believe it about myself for a really, really long time. And I wanted to be a disciple. I wanted to follow Jesus with all my heart. I wanted to serve his people. And I would go and I would speak over, I got my first speaking engagement. Also, sounds so wild. And sometimes I feel like I'm calling my pastor out. I'm not. He gave me my first speaking engagement when I was 17. Also, I just said I was saved when I was 17. So, wow. But I'm so grateful that they did that for many, that, they saw something in me that I did not see in myself. And they wanted to call me up into what God had called me to at a very young age. And they have been stewarding those gifts as my authority for, the past 11 years. And they have been doing it very well, in my opinion. So, when I was going out to speak, sometimes I would speak to youth. Oftentimes I would, especially when I was starting, I wasn't speaking to adults. When I started off, I was speaking to a lot of youth, kids who came from hard places. And I would say, God loves you and you are so loved. You're worthy of a family and God welcomes you into his kingdom. You can be kicked out by all these families, but God says, come to me. But then I would lay in my bed and I would think about myself, and the thoughts that I had were not good. I struggled with suicidal ideation. I struggled with anxiety. I struggled with a lot of self-hatred and called it humility, which I think a lot of us Christians do. And I realized, what I speak over everybody else, I do not think is accessible. I don't think it's accessible to me. And that was affecting, that thought pattern that I was not loved, and that I had a lot to hate about myself was affecting every behavioral pattern, my relationships, how I thought about other people, the way that I entered into relationships. And, it just came to a point where things felt so, so broken that I had to really start to excavate my heart and see why do I think this way? And how can I change it?
And that started at 17.
No, I mean, that has been an ongoing, I would say I was saved at 17.
Yes.
But I would say, that excavation started maybe more at like 24. Yeah, 24, 25. And, I was doing ministry that whole time. And it was, again, that like speaking these things over other people, believing them for others wholeheartedly and not believing them for myself. That was really striking to me.
Yes.
And now a quick break to hear from one of our incredible sponsors who make the podcast available. Sissy, I have good and bad news. The bad news is that our brains may not be the only sluggish organ we have in our body right now.
Oh no, I can't take another sluggish organ.
Over 30% of Americans have a sluggish liver, a problem that often goes undetected until the very last minute. But here's the good news. Dose is on a mission to educate us all on why it's so important to maintain your liver health and has created an incredible product to help you do just that.
Your liver is the second largest organ in your body and is responsible for over 500 functions in your body.
So we can't afford for it to be sluggish. Dose's science-backed formula promotes liver function, aids digestion, eases bloating, and even boosts energy levels.
Dose is gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, and vegan.
Save 30% on your first month of subscription by going to dosedaily.co/RBG or entering RBG at checkout.
That's dosedaily.co/RBG for 30% off your first month subscription. As two people who have worked with kids who have had really tragic stories as well, I think you had more than your fair share of all the things that you have been through. Tori, there was something in you from so early on that was tenacious and resilient and fought hard to know Jesus, obviously, but for yourself. In a way that we just have been talking a lot about resilience lately. It just makes me so grateful. And to know that you spent all these years in that fight that is now, I feel like I almost picture you like a Pied Piper, like leading the way with all these kids trailing after you, whose lives you are changing that you don't ever see, that you won't ever know. But man, it makes me so grateful. And to think that God was, it's like the verse that talks about being enlarged in the waiting. It's like God was growing these incredible things in you that would give life to so many. I couldn't be any more grateful.
Oh, Sissy, thank you. You are so sweet. And, I have do have this resilience in me, but it has been the favor of the Lord and his goodness in my life, and the way that he has presented himself to me and just showed himself as my father. That has truly been, transforming, because I wanted a dad so bad, for so long. And
of
then when
course.
I understood, oh, like, God is my father, he loves me and protects me, and I'm his daughter.
Mhm.
Being able to see myself in that way has really just transformed my heart and helped me hold on and not give up when things have been hard.
Mm.
Yes.
Mm.
Mm.
Tori, one of the key themes in your book is in inviting Jesus into our pain. And can you talk some about what this looks like in practice and how this relationship with Christ can help us find a lasting healing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that sometimes our tendency is to be like, oh, the past is the past, and, throw away our pain and just keep moving forward, pray it away, trust God. Um, and I think we forget sometimes that Jesus suffered, and he was like known for his sufferings. And I think it is in Isaiah at one point that it says that, people turned their eyes away from Jesus because of his suffering and because of his pain, because that was something that he was known for. And so I think it is sometimes our natural inclination, right, to kind of turn our eyes away from the pain, to look away. And because we don't want to feel it, and it makes us uncomfortable. But as I have been forced in a sense, like I said, either by the judge in therapy, to acknowledge the pain that I've went through, to acknowledge the abuse and the hurt. And so initially, I was forced. It wasn't something that I'm like, I was so wise just to do. But what I realize is when, we process through our pain, and when we're willing to really acknowledge it and see it for what it is, we can then mend it. We can, bring it back together properly, and intentionally. And when we do that, then it's able to be used for something good. I think it's Genesis 50:20 that says, what you meant for evil, God is going to use for good. And when we see our pain for what it is, and we don't just throw it in the past, and the past is the past, I'm just going to ignore that, I'm not going to look at it. What we do is we're able to see other people in their pain and in their suffering more fully. We're able to have compassion and greater understanding. When I was in college, I ran track, and I had a teammate. She was one of my really good friends. And one of the reasons we became close is because I went to a college that, very thankful for my education. But I went to a college where most of the kids who went there, most of the students who went there, came from very affluent backgrounds. I went there because I got to run track. I got lucky. And, I became friends with her because she also had a little bit of a hard background, and her dad was an alcoholic. Her dad tried to get sober on his own, which I didn't know at the time. But when you get sober on your own, if you try to, it can cause a lot of issues. And so he passed away. And I was working. I was quote unquote working. When you're an athlete, at the college I went to, you watch the weight room, and really you just sit there and you do homework. So I was working, sitting there doing my homework, and she came down from her classroom. She came down the steps, and she was just weeping. She just found out that her dad passed away, and she just like fell into my arms, and she was crying. And I looked at her, and I was like, "Are you okay? Like, what's going on?" And she was telling me, and I said what I had heard other ministry leaders say, and I said, "Alexa, I think you just need to trust God."
Mm.
And that's just what I had heard people say. And she just like screamed, and she said, "Tori, my dad just died." And I knew in that moment that that wasn't what I should have said, but I didn't have any other answer. That's just what people had told me. And so I think that was just a moment where I kind of forgot my own pain, right? I'd forgotten my own hurt. And if someone would have told me in my deepest hurt, just trust God, like, it would have shattered my heart. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't trust God, but it means that we shouldn't use shallow maxims for very real pain. God is not a Band-Aid. He's a balm, and we have to go to him again and again and again, just like we have to put on a balm again and again and again on an open wound for it to be healed. We can't just cover it up and expect it to heal. And sometimes that's what those shallow maxims can do, or sometimes what throwing away our pain or not acknowledging ours can do. It can result in us then hurting others.
Thank you so much for that reminder. Well, thinking about kids who are struggling in pain and trauma, how would you encourage parents and caregivers for those kids?
Oh, I like to say I am no parenting expert. I have somehow gotten a voice in parenting because I have this perspective of being a former foster youth, but no parenting expert here. But, something that I love that you talked about resilience, Sissy. That is something that I'm really passionate about. And there's this book, everyone listening has probably heard of it because these are probably very intellectual, like very caring people. This book is called Grit. It is one of my favorite books. And it is psychological research. And the researcher who writes the book says that, the number one characteristic of a person who is successful and who can overcome and stick through these things that are hard is grit. And then grit is like a combination of resilience, which I think, so kids who've grown up like me, kids that foster and adoptive parents are parenting, they got the resilience part. Typically they have that. They can adapt when triggers and trauma comes up. And then the other thing that, makes grit what it is, it's twofold: resilience and then discipline. And I think that's what a lot of young people are personally lacking. And I think there's a lot of, this is kind of controversial, but I think in the trauma world, there is some rhetoric and some practices where it allows children not to have discipline and to be babied. And when I look at what my track coach did for me and what the people did for me that I love and admire so much, is they didn't lower the bar. They raised the bar and expected me to raise to it. They had high expectations of me. They had big goals for me. And I wouldn't be where I am if they didn't raise the bar super high. If they would have lowered the bar and I said, okay, that's the mark, I don't think I would be looking back at them and saying, wow, they really helped me. They raised the bar and said, this is what you can accomplish. This is what you're capable of. But it's going to take a lot of discipline and hardship and doing the things that you don't. Ultimately, that's what discipline is: doing the things you don't want to do when you don't want to do them, doing them anyway. And, I think that sometimes our kids need less babying and more of that. And I think that's kind of harsh in the culture that we're living in right now. But
we're so thankful for you to say it. We agree so much.
Wholeheartedly.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because I know that can be a little taboo in the culture we live in, but it is the number one characteristic of a successful person, of a well-adapted person, is discipline, is doing the things that we don't want to do anyway.
Yeah. Okay, you made mention a little earlier, but we'd love for you to talk more about your advocacy work for foster care, adoption, and vulnerable children.
Yeah. So what I do regularly, typically, is organizations reach out to me and they ask me to come partner with them, and I help them raise funds by telling my story, typically from a stage, and I help them raise funds so that they can continue to serve the youth in their care. I consult organizations who are serving vulnerable people and oversee their programs to assure that what they're doing is actually effective and helpful. Sometimes in spaces, we do what's marketable, and sometimes that can be, sometimes marketable things are good things, but sometimes marketable things are just marketable, and that can be harmful. And so we want to do things that are actually impactful and helpful. So I can consult with organizations to help them maybe just see some holes in their work. And then, of course, help them see the good in their work. And then in June, I had this amazing opportunity. I don't think I've ever felt so chosen in my entire life. A congressman chose me to be one of 4 witnesses and to testify before Congress, before the Ways and Means Committee, to help change policy for youth and foster care.
That's amazing.
It was truly one of the most amazing things I have ever been a part of. And it was such a great honor. And anything that really is involved with youth and foster care. In December, I got to go to a think tank so a think tank is it's another policy space For people who don't know that term, I didn't before December. I was like, I got invited and I was like, what's a think tank? And it's where you sit in this small group and you come up with ideas of how you can just improve policy for kids in foster care. And so, yeah, I've gotten to do so much cool work by the grace of God. And so thankful. I feel oftentimes like Esther, like God has just opened the doors and allowed me to do so much more than I could have ever imagined, and it wouldn't have been done without his hand over my life.
Well, thinking about the kids you're representing and all the kids that we've been talking about that have experienced trauma, what do you feel like kids need most from parents today?
Going back to, raising the bar high. I think that's just something that our culture is forgetting. I'm actually reading this book. I read lots of parenting books because I want to be a good parent. I think that parenting books are good, and then I think we should all surround ourselves or with really good moms and with really good parents. But one of the books I have read, books that are like, let your kids do their thing, they will figure it out. And I have read books that are, right now I'm reading, I think it's called The Tale of the Tiger Mom. It's a very, very different end of the spectrum than just let your kids do whatever they want. So it highlights Asian culture, actually, in the way that Asians tend to raise their children. And it's written by an Asian woman, and it has been just really interesting. Something that she really emphasizes is like, we expect a lot of our children, and that is seen as respect. Like if you see that your children can accomplish this much, then your child knows that you respect them. And so I just thought that was such an interesting perspective. And I think what else kids need is probably the number one thing is attachment. I don't know, I know that you guys have like wide listeners. It's not just foster and adopted parents, but in the foster and adoption space, attachment is a topic that's talked about a lot. But it's relevant for all parenting. It's relevant for all of us. I think about attachment with my biological children all the time. It's at the forefront of my mind. But there are different attachment styles. And I think that we have to recognize as parents what our natural attachment style is. Not just, sometimes we're just quick to be like, oh, this is what our kids' attachment style is. But usually our kids' attachment style comes from ours. And so I think it's important to know what ours is. And then start to see, if it's not, so secure attachment is what we're all aiming for. And then there's other ones that you guys, the people who are listening to this, can look up. But we're aiming for secure attachment, but all of us probably have tendencies towards the other ones. And so if we can just read those and see in ourselves and reflect and see in ourselves what we have tendency towards and how that affects our kids, I think that can be really insightful and helpful for how we can connect with our kids deeper.
Yes.
It's great. We talk a lot about how in 3 decades of doing this work, we've never seen parents as discouraged or weary. And you do a beautiful job of speaking to people who are stuck, overwhelmed, and weary. What would you want to say to weary and overwhelmed parents right now?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to my mind is do not grow weary of doing good, for in due time you will reap a harvest. And I think when we think about that scripture, oftentimes we think about the reaping the harvest, and like that's what our eyes are on. But when I think about that scripture, I think about the words in due time. We don't know when that time is, and we never know. There's like this image that I've seen where there's he's like a miner, and he's like chipping away in the cave, and he's like just about to give up, but he doesn't know that he is just like a centimeter away from the gold. And so I think, we don't know in that due time is what we need to focus on, because we never know how close we are to the gold. In a lot of things, I think I want to speak to specifically to parents who are parenting kids with trauma, who are parenting kids who are coming from hard places. A lot of the things that you are just working through and trying to help your child through, just remember that those things are likely not your fault. And sometimes it just takes, when I look at my own life, I wrote my first book, Fostered, when I was 22 years old. And I look back at that book and I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to write it, because I think it gives people the perspective of where I was at that time and where their kids likely will be at that time. However, I look back and I say, I could have written that with more grace. I could have written that with more compassion, because I have a greater understanding now, because I have been a parent for longer and I'm now a foster parent on the other side. And so a lot of that in due time sometimes just comes with experience and time and age and that prefrontal cortex being developed. And so just be encouraged, especially when you're in those younger years, that you're just in the due time waiting season.
I love that.
Me too.
Well, so I am confident everyone who's listening, who's not familiar with you already, will want to get a copy of the book and follow along with all you're doing. Will you tell them where they can find you?
Yes, thank you. You can follow me at Tori Hope Petersen. And I always say Petersen is SEN, not SON, because you're going to type it in. You're not going to be able to find me. And I'm most active on Instagram, probably. I do some stuff on TikTok and Facebook. And you can get the book anywhere books are sold. It's called Breaking the Patterns That Break You. And it comes out February 4th, but you can pre-order it if you're listening to this before then. And I'm so appreciative if you did.
Wonderful. Okay, we end every episode with something fun and food related.
Oh, I'm a
good. You are beautifully suited for this question. Then it's a two-parter. So part one is queso or guac. Part two is what's your favorite taco?
Oh, guacamole, definitely, because it's healthier than queso, but also it has great taste. I'm sorry, I was just imagining queso and guac in my head that I didn't even catch your first question. I just got so excited.
That's so great. You're our kind of people.
Yeah,
we love that. Okay, and we need to hear a favorite taco too.
Oh, favorite taco. So, are we talking about from places?
You get free reign.
Okay, free reign.
It could either be one you prepare or one you purchase.
Okay, so I was in I think it's very popular in Texas. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Do you have any idea? It's very popular in Texas, and they have just this huge variety of tacos. Like there's like a waffle taco. There's regular tacos, like just like a steak taco. Hold on. I'm gonna look at this up right now.
Is it Torchy's?
Popular. That's it. How did you know that? That's it.
Torchy's.
We love
Torchy's.
So good. It's
it's so good.
Yeah, so good. So we don't have anything like that in Defiance, Ohio. But I think I just put on my Instagram story once, like, hey, I'm going here, like food recommendations. And literally every person said that place. And then I went there and it was above and beyond what I thought it was going to be. I loved it.
It's so good. Great recommendation. Thank you for that. And Tori, thank you for just this time and for your heart and for your work. We just really couldn't be any more grateful for you.
Yes.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Delightful to get to talk with you.
Yes,
again.
it is.
David, what a team we have that we get to call friends who help make this podcast possible.
Amanda Young, our operations manager.
Chris Starrett, our engineer.
Our management team at H Squared.
And we are thrilled to be a part of the That Sounds Fun network.
Our music was created by the insanely talented Dave Haywood of Lady A.
And if this podcast felt helpful to you, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing, all the things.
We are grateful for you and cheering you on always.